Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. As you can see, I'm digging up an aeonium. In fact, I'm going to dig up all the aeoniums that I've put here in the jaw garden. This is only the second year that I've planted them out in here, and they've done really well. And this goes against a lot of things you might think about succulents, because it's been a pretty wet year, and they don't particularly like it wet. It hasn't been very sunny or warm, and you think of succulents being plants that like it in sunshine. But the key to aeoniums is not so much what happens to them in summer, but what happens to them in winter. They're not hardy, and now we're in October, we might well get the odd bit of frost, so I'm not going to risk it. I'm digging them up, and I'm going to take them in. I will pot them up and keep them indoors over winter. But this is something I'm doing less and less of. By and large, I'm trying to keep plants in the ground, because there was a time, not so very long ago, when the beginning of October, you might expect frost, and now increasingly it's warmer, but it's wetter. And that's posing a whole new range of problems, how we manage our winter gardens. Everything is changing all the time, and we're all having to learn to adapt and react accordingly. I do love the way they've grown in here. And of course, the aeoniums have been used for bedding for years, but bedding goes in and bedding comes out. Right, there we go with that one. Now, coming up on today's programme, Rachel is looking at the extraordinary ways that plants communicate with their pollinators.
Different colours tells the pollinator whether that flower has been visited or not. So it goes from yellow to pink after pollination. It means the pollinators don't waste time. There's no nectar in there and they don't need pollinating. It's coding, basically.
Very clear instructions.
Yeah.
We visit a nursery in Devon, whose owners are besotted with succulents.
I definitely call it an obsession, verging on addiction when it comes to succulents.
When I met Tom, I just got into it.
And then it escalated.
Yeah, it escalated very, very quickly.
Arit explores a garden in West Sussex, where three very different design styles have been skillfully combined into one.
Coming out of the expanse of the lawn, the path is beginning to really constrict me again, which is lovely because I'm up close and personal to all of these wonderful plants. And again, it's a third zone of the garden that feels completely different.
And I shall be making a bulb lasagna. October's a really good month to move plants around. And when you do so, you may not want to just take a plant from A to B, you may want to split it to build up more plants. And now is the time to do that. Now, what I've dug up from the cottage garden is a hardy geranium. However, it's a little bit big for the position I've put it in. It's very vigorous. You can see there's an awful lot of growth. I mean, if I put this on here, that is a substantial plant. So I want to move some further back into the border. I also would love to have more in the orchard beds. And rather than go and buy new plants, I'm going to lift about half the ones I've got and divide them. So first thing to do is to cut off all the top growth. Once you lift it out, the roots will be broken, they'll be traumatized. They don't want to have to go to a lot of work supporting a large amount of foliage. Right. Now we've cleared the decks a bit. So, if we're lucky, we might be able to tease this apart. Maybe we have to cut it, but first thing to do is to lose any loose soil so you can get at the roots. Right, this is where I'm going to cut it. Now, see, that went in quite easily because essentially it hasn't got a woody core. Now, can you see from there, 1, 2, 3 plants at least, as many back there. I could break that up into at least half a dozen sections. So now it pulls apart really easily. And look, here we go. all these are new plants. There we go. And I'm just pulling them apart gently. I'm not breaking them. The advantages of this are twofold. The first, obviously, is these plants are for free. So very quickly, you're building up the second advantage, which is quantity. So I'm going to get probably 20 plants from this one. Pot them all up, just with that potting mix, which in this case has got quite a lot of grit in it. And so if we just take one of these, I'm going to trim the roots a little bit to fit. They'll be fine. Don't be tempted to pot up too big a plant. Much better to keep them small, grow them on so you have small, healthy plants, and they will quickly bulk up in the ground. Now, you may not have a plant in your garden that you know you want to dig up and split. However, if you go to garden centres at this time of year, they quite often have largish plants that can be broken up. So, for example, this heuchera. If you buy the largest plant of the type you want and that you can afford, take it home, take it out the pot and divide it up. Now, in this case, it's a good idea to have an old saw to divide up plants that are a bit more woody. So just cut down through the middle like that. There we go. So in this case, I've just made 2 plants. I'm actually going to put this back in this pot because I want to plant both these heucheras into the spring garden, along with a pollinator I've got, which I want to break up, and a few other plants. But while I'm dividing these, we're going to join Rachel again for the second of her visits to see the ways that plants and pollinators interact. Prepare to be amazed.
Flowers. We relish their colours, pack our borders with them and delight in each exuberant season. We also know flowers are really here to pull in pollinators and thrive.
What we're learning, thanks to science, is that beautiful flowers like this lythrum is drawing in the pollinators and then encouraging them to stay, just going from one flower to the neighbouring ones, pollinating as they go.
And to attract those pollinators, flowers provide rewards, primarily nectar for fuel and pollen to feed their young. Professor Jane Memmott is a pollination expert at Bristol University.
Perhaps if you think about it as like a supermarket or your favourite deli, all of those wares laid out, what they wanted for the customers or the pollinators to come back again and again to pollinate those flowers. So yeah, you've got kind of effectively you're looking for kind of brand loyalty almost.
Yes, well, it certainly seems to be working here. I'd come back here, wouldn't you?
Yeah, no, it's gorgeous. It really is.
To keep their pollinator customers fed and loyal, some flowers have worked out ways to show when individual blooms have been pollinated and their nectar stores are empty.
I've always been intrigued by this sort of flower head in different colours. So what's going on there?
The different colours tells the pollinator whether that flower has been visited or not. So it goes from yellow to pink after pollination. It means the pollinators don't waste time. There's no nectar in there and they don't need pollinating. It's coding, basically. So,
Very
yeah.
clear instructions.
Yeah, absolutely.
When forget-me-nots have been pollinated, their scent has changed from yellow to white. But some flowers get very technical and electrical in how they interact with their pollinators.
Now, as a child, this was a favourite trick. Rubbing a balloon on your jumper and then either getting it to stick to the wall or to a friend's hair, just making it stand on end. There we go. And it works because of electrostatic energy, and plants have that too.
Professor Danielle Robert is a sensory ecologist, also from Bristol University, and led the research team on this supercharged discovery.
Danielle, tell me a bit about the electrostatic charge and how that works in this context.
Well, plants, having their roots in the soil, full of electrons, will tend to be negative. So the bees, on the other hand, are positively charged. As they fly, they rub against the air and they become positively charged.
So why is that important?
Well, people noticed a while ago that pollen jumps, literally jumps from flowers to bees. And we came up with the idea, okay, maybe there is an electrostatic charge going on there. So we know that pollen are negatively charged because they are on the plant, and they will whiz towards the bee and stick to it, which is what the plant wants. They want pollen to go from themselves to the bee.
Sounds incredibly clever to me.
Nature has its ways.
Danielle's theory proved to be right. Pollen does jump onto a positively charged bee because of an electrostatic charge. But that charge also helps to tell bees if a flower has been visited recently.
When the bee approaches the plant, it comes with that positive charge, the flower will react, and when the bee visits and then leaves, that plant will be left with a more positive charge.
Amazingly, bees can sense those charges using tiny hairs on their bodies. And that helps them work out both the shape of the flower and the likely levels of nectar.
The advantage of that is that the next bee coming in will be able to detect that and see that, oh, they're not all equal. This one has been visited. It's like a picture from the past and telling maybe that there is not as much nectar, so maybe I'll come back a bit later.
Incredibly clever. It's almost as if the plant is speaking. It's interacting with the bee.
I think this is a case of communication between species, as far away as a flower and a bee.
So clever.
Yeah.
What's even better is that Danielle has a machine engineered to show that change in electrostatic charge. It's wired directly into the stem of a flower and it makes a high-pitched whine. And as the charge gets more positive, the pitch gets higher.
I'm charging this rod to approximately the charge of a bee. And if we approach it to the flower, there will be a change in the frequency that we hear now. Okay. And that's a mark that the plant is charging up. So why don't you have a go?
Yes, love to. Okay, just hold it close to the flower.
Yeah.
That tone sort of sweeps lower and higher as I get closer. That's extraordinary.
That's the change in the electric field around the flower.
Absolutely amazing. What I'd love to do is see a bee do that as well, but
Yes.
How long have you got? Oh, no, nearly.
It's a fairly big ask. Having experimented on our flower, we've made it positive, and bees will avoid it until the charge fades. We're in Yeo Valley Organic Garden in Somerset, as Danielle tests only on organic flowers, and there's acres of blooms here to choose from.
Come on, bees.
But the sound will change if a bee gets even fairly close to our flower.
Okay, there's one there. Come on, just come round the front. Oh, goodness, look. Yes. That's incredible.
But flowers don't just use electrostatics to send messages about nectar. Danielle discovered more.
We've observed that for some plants, like petunias, when bees are flying by, that petunia reacts by emitting more scent, more chemicals, so that it's as if they know the pollinators are there and they want to advertise themselves even more, which is quite amazing, I thought.
That is extraordinary that they can sense the I mean, the whole thing is just mind-boggling, actually. Unbelievable.
For Danielle and his team, this is just the beginning. There are so many more flowers to test, and definitely so much more to discover.
It's only quite recently that science is beginning to explore the complexity of the relationship between plants and pollinators. And I feel just incredibly privileged to have seen and heard for myself just some of the mystery that exists between flowers and pollinators. And I am totally in awe of their brilliance.
What strikes me watching that is not just how incredible that is and how extraordinary, but also how little we know. What else is there to be discovered? Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Well, here in the spring garden, I've added in a pulmonaria. This is Pulmonaria moonlight, which I've divided. I've got the heucheras here to plant out, and I've also got 3 small purple heucheras. And these are plants, by the way, that like the light shade of spring. Now, if you can't find a large plant to divide, a really good way to bulk up and get the quantity as well as quality is to buy lots of small plants. When you buy a plant that size, it's going to grow away quickly and it's going to be cheap. A lot of what you pay for in a plant is time. People who have to water plants, pot them on, feed them. So if you buy it small and you manage it, that's going to be a lot cheaper than buying a bigger one. So I'll just pop these in the ground as a group. By planting these together, I may get an immediate impact from small plants, but also planning for the future, because these will grow together to make a clump, which you can divide up and start to spread out. And this is just one of the ways that you can create quantity, which is the other side of quality. You need both in a border to really create the best possible effect. Right, while I am adding more quality and more quantity here in the spring garden, we're going to go to Branscombe in North Devon, where Tom Adkin and Julia Consolandi found that their shared love of succulents led them to open a nursery specialising particularly in succulents.
I definitely call it an obsession, verging on addiction when it comes to succulents.
You end up loving them so much. You know, I'd keep them all if I could. I wouldn't sell any. I'm Julia.
I'm Tom, and this is Piccolo Plants Nursery, where we're a bit mad about succulents.
We got over 200 varieties, going from sedums to aeoniums, echeverias.
And everything in between, really.
Yeah.
Working in gardens, when I was a gardener before this, there'd be a lot more normal plants there, but the succulents to me always had a bit more of an interest. There was different foliage, different flowers, there were a different way of growing them entirely. And it was the variety that I think hooked me initially.
When I met Tom, I just started doing it a bit as well, and then I just got into it.
And then it escalated.
Yeah, it escalated very, very quickly.
One of the main types of plants we grow here at the nursery are the hardier types. They're the kind that can generally be left outdoors all year round with sufficient drainage.
We have also tender, also known as non-hardy succulents. They can be kept inside all year round or outside for the summer if you have a garden.
Succulents work by storing a lot of their nutrients and water that they need within the leaves to survive long periods of drought that we don't normally have in the UK. If in doubt, don't water it. You will not kill it from forgetting about it, but if you overwater it or fuss it too much,
Yeah.
you'll be more likely to kill it.
It's easier to kill them with too much love than neglect.
Yeah.
With succulents, you can play around with the amount of water, with the position, so in full sun, full shade, partial sun, and that will bring out different colors in the plants, and it's a way of the plant to cope with the condition. So we have Aeoniums that will turn very red in the sun, Echeverias that could bring out pink colors. This is one of my absolute favorite plants in this bed. Some would say that it looks like a cabbage. I personally think it looks a lot like coral. Another really funny one. This is a Delosperma, also known as pickle plant. The leaves do look like little pickles. They are covered in these really fine hairs, and then it has this really tiny little daisy look-like flowers, and it just spreads and covers everything, and it's just quite amusing to look at it, I think. Succulents are very easy to propagate. I wouldn't cut it too close to the rosette because the leaves are very fragile and it will just come off. So I would go a bit lower. Now you need to leave this for a couple of days so that it can callus over. This is one I cut a couple of days ago. And as you can see, it's already callus over, which means the wound is healed and is ready to be potted on. Use a gritty soil for your plant and just stick it inside the pot. Just press a bit and leave it. After a week, try and pull it out gently. If you feel resistant, it means that it started putting down roots and you can water it for the first time. If it doesn't and it comes out, then put it back in and leave it another week. And then repeat until it roots.
We've got this hardy gabion area that we've planted out. Drought tolerant, you don't have to water them. You know, the only maintenance we do on this is a bit of weeding or adding new plants in as we see fit. They generally want very well-drained soil. So on this gabion area that we've got here, we've got a cubic metre in these cages of stone, and then we've got landscaping fabric about 8 to 9 inches below here, filled with a probably 60% grit mix of compost. We leave these plants out all year round. We don't fuss them at all. We don't give them any special winter care as long as they have that well-drained spot. I've got this empty area of the gabions that I want to plant up today. I'm going to be putting in various ones for different levels of height and shape. This one's Crassula saracaulis. We're going to give it a little bit more space within the flower bed, and this time of year it is covered in these gorgeous flowers. Its common name is the bonsai Crassula, and it will make a small bonsai tree within this space, real centrepiece for our border. This sempervivum I'm going to use, it's got lots of extra babies around the sides of the plant, which will fill out this gap nicely. It's got a nice bit of colour change through the year, as well as slightly furry tips. Sempervivum are monocarpic, so once they've flowered, they will die back, but the other babies at that point will be taking over. This is Sedum coral reef. It's got a lovely orange colour at the moment, and we're hoping to use it to cover this area of the gabions here and trail down because it's quite a quick grower. All looking good. The best thing about these is we don't even have to water them in. One thing we like to do with succulent multiplanters is either reuse a broken pot, so you've got the recycling side of it, or we can cut a section out. And with that, we can do a fantastic display where you've got the top planted, usually with more height, spilling over, and then through the damaged bit of the pot, you'll have succulents all bursting out. And once they've grown in there, you don't see any of the broken bits of the pots, you just see loads of colour. There's always new weird ones to find, new hybrids. There's so many different species and variations in amongst that if you had the space and the time to do it, there probably isn't a limit as to how many you could collect. Having these polytunnels as an office is just about as good as it can get, in my opinion.
But whether you just have one succulent on a windowsill or a polytunnel full, I think just the really important piece of advice there is very simple. If in doubt, don't water. You'll do no harm by not watering. You certainly can do harm by overwatering. I think most of us found September in our gardens disappointing. September can be such a lovely month with this softening of the light. And the colours of summer are still there, but they're fading, and it's a slow, rather delicate, beautiful process. Well, that certainly didn't happen here at Longmeadow. We had pretty bad weather, and the gardeners just sort of slumped in a way, except for the grass borders. And this is where grasses come in and work so well, because you have all these metallic colours developing as we go into and through October, even into November. Golds and silvers and brasses and bronzes and coppers touched with purple. And they hold themselves, it doesn't matter how windy or rainy it is, they can take it, and I love them for that. Now, still to come on today's programme. Arit meets two garden designers who have blended three distinct styles into one unified whole.
We love Mediterranean gardens, we love English country gardens, I guess, and we love Japanese gardens. So those three different elements, I think, how could we put that into a garden, but in a way that is coherent?
And we meet a self-confessed butterfly obsessive who has packed his garden with a whole host of plants to attract as many as possible.
This is a rather lovely plant. This is sweet rocket. This one actually provides nectar for the adult butterflies in the spring. And then the leaves will provide caterpillar food source, and the seed pods will be eaten by the orange-tipped caterpillar. So got three butterflies going on there in one plant.
But first, we're going to visit one of your gardens.
I'm Maisie Bartlett, and I've had this allotment probably now for about 9 years, I think. I was bullied into it by a friend of mine, Annie, who is very wise and knows everything. At the time, I thought that she was just put me through some sort of hideous trauma for no apparent reason, because it was really hard work. However, with the passage of time, I've understood that once again, she's given me a winner. This is a really important part of my life here. So these are, I'm going to say echinops, but I'm sure it's not said like that, but that's the name that I know it by. It's another bee plant. Bees absolutely love it. I just love balls, and that's it. I love anything that's a globe, anything that's round. So this is totally delightful to me to look at. It just soothes my eye. I'm prone to depression and anxiety, as well as extreme joy, both of which I experience here. And quite often I find that you can come up here feeling quite sort of nihilistic, and you can leave feeling in a totally different place. I'm constantly absorbing shapes and colours all the time. So that adds to my creative life, I guess. It's quite often I've just sat up here and painted and drawn, and that's just it's such a wonderful thing to do. Now I'm going to take you back to the rowan tree, I think. Rowan trees symbolise protection. So I only found that out after I was looking into it not being cut down. I was trying to find reasons to not take it out. It sent up all these really delightful, like, ha-ha, shoots of joy and wonder here. I just really love it, and I love the, the vigour of it and the life of it. And look at that, it's now sort of decided to go, it's going to give some shade over the water spot. I was ill last year, and people would come and collect me and sit me on the bench and water for me, which was just an act of true humanity. So that was wonderful. And definitely was hugely contributory to me getting better, I would say. It just makes me smile, it makes me happy.
Well, thanks for sharing your allotment, Maisie, and I think you're not alone in finding that allotments, which for many years and for most of us were places to grow vegetables if you either didn't have enough space or no garden at all, increasingly people are like you, finding them places where they can connect with the natural world in all its various forms, and so much the better for that. I'm preparing a pot for display next spring, and this is what we call a bulb lasagna. In other words, layers of bulbs. The idea is to have a succession of displays in one pot that overlap. And how they overlap and how much they overlap will depend as much as anything else on the season and the weather. I've got some narcissi, Arctic bells, and this is one of my favourite daffodils. It's got this rather curious bell shape rather than trumpet-shaped flower, which flowers very early. Last year, my Arctic bells were flowering by the middle of February, and they go on flowering to the end of March. So you've got 6 weeks of this lovely, delicate, but surprisingly tough little flower. I've got a grape hyacinth, Muscari, and this is one called Ocean Magic, which is a pale, icy blue. Now, the third one is a crocus. It's called Romance. I've chosen it because it has a pale primrose colour element to its petals, but also a brighter yellow centre. So hopefully those three will work well together and work well on their own. Right, I've got a shallow pot, I've got a crock in the bottom to stop the compost falling out. To start with, you do need a really gritty compost, and that is important. So whatever peat-free compost you use, add plenty of horticultural grit. It must have really good drainage. The lowest layer of your lasagna should be the biggest bulbs. So we'll start with Arctic bells and plant them more closely than you would if you were planting them outside. In a container, the secret is to pack them. Get in as many as you can. As long as they're not touching, you want them to really fill the space. There we go. Cover them up. Ready for the next layer. I'm planting some Muscari. Of course, one of the great advantages of doing a lasagna with small bulbs is that they're relatively cheap for each bulb, so you can get a lot in. And although I love the deep, rich colours you get in Muscari, these very pale blue ones I think are special. Don't worry that you're going to somehow block the bulbs underneath coming through. You won't. They will find a way. Right, one more there. Good. Now we'll cover those. And last but not least, the crocus. And I always say with bulbs, you should plant them at least twice their depth, and that's certainly true outside. And it's a good idea in a pot if you've got the space, but don't worry if you haven't. As long as they're covered, they will flower. Of course, it's worth pointing out, always plant pointy side up. Now, these little crocus will definitely flower first. There we go. And cover these. And I'm going to top it off with a layer of pure grit. It keeps the petals clean. You've got these outside. If it rains, you can get a splashback from the compost, whereas if you've got grit on the surface, that doesn't happen. So there we are. That now can go somewhere cool, so don't bring them indoors, don't put them in a greenhouse. Water them now, and then you don't need to water them again until you start to see the shoots appear, which will be early February, maybe even late January. Put them outside where they get as much sun as possible and enjoy them from the middle of February right to the end of March. Now, early this summer, Arit went to visit a garden near Horsham in Sussex. It had been inspired by a number of different styles and created by not one, but two garden designers.
Every garden has its challenges, maybe lots of shade, heavy soil, or a tricky terrain. And this garden has all of those things, and yet it is an incredible, beautiful space where the plants are the main players and there is minimal hard landscaping. And there are so many great design tips that can be used in any garden.
It's helped that Debbie and Ian run a garden design business together from the house, so they understood the issues and the atmospheres they wanted to create.
The garden is looking splendid, but where would you start with a garden like this?
We had quite a challenging design issue to resolve here because it actually slopes in two directions. It slopes from the house down to the bottom of the garden in the west, and it also slopes from the north side of the garden down to the south. So we had two slopes to try and resolve.
We love Mediterranean gardens, we love English country gardens, I guess, and we love Japanese gardens. So those three different elements, I think, how could we put that into a garden in a way that is coherent? So here we've got the sunny area, you've got the plants that love that. That ticks the Mediterranean box, if you like. And as we move down the garden, then we're moving towards a shadier area. So we actually got this transition of an English country garden. And then at the bottom where it's quite shady, we can use the Japanese type plants and give you a different character.
You can tell that this garden is all about celebrating plants. And is that part of the approach that you have with the design?
We love plants, and we especially love roses. We knew right at the beginning that this was going to be a plants person's garden. And I think we envisaged it as an entirely planted space, out of which we then carved the spaces so that, you know, we've got an oval lawn in here and the path snakes down through the plants. So I think it's like a little private universe that we've created here, its own little character, its own little atmosphere.
That oval lawn is designed to be low maintenance.
We call it a 10-minute lawn. By the time you've thought about mowing it and then walking down to the shed to get the mower, walking back up to mow the lawn and putting the mower back in the shed takes 10 minutes.
Within the main areas of this garden, there are other hidden spaces and strong focal points.
I really love this part of the garden. It's absolutely gorgeous, densely planted, which is what I really enjoy. I've got a fragrance pumping at me from the roses, so Vanessa Bell and Emily Bronte here. And there's a Stipa tenuissima, Alchemilla mollis. It's really immersive. It's coming off of the patio, so it's almost like it's a garden within a garden. But what's really clever and what is a design must is to bring the plants as close to the house as possible, so that when you're inside, your garden is with you as a permanent view. And I think it's done beautifully here and something to be celebrated.
To tempt you deeper into the garden, it's clever design that leads you on.
The hard landscape materials in this garden are very minimal, and what's been chosen are very soft and mellow, like the silver timber on the garage and the local stone on the patio, which is really lovely. But Debbie and Ian spoke about the level change issues that they had in the garden, so I like how they've created these kind of very gentle steps that lead you onto this gravel path. And they've deliberately curved it because that creates a meander into the space. And as I've come down into the garden, the atmosphere of the space has really changed, and even the microclimate and the plants, but it makes you really want to go on and explore even more.
It leads to the country garden, the 10-minute lawn, and the planting, which is lifted by the natural tilt of the terrain.
One of the other things that they've done is celebrate the slope here by accentuating it in this border. Now, of course, what that means is that when you plant into it, that all of the plants that would normally be maybe this high now can be this height, really adding to the immersement in the garden. I love how the cardoons are towering over me.
The open green of the lawn sets that planting off beautifully and creates a gentle breathing space. And then comes the shade.
Coming out of the expanse of the lawn, the path is beginning to really constrict me again, which is lovely because I'm up close and personal to all of these wonderful plants. And I can see that Debbie and Ian have taken advantage of this shady area of the garden, bringing in the Japanese influence that they like, things like the lovely Hakanakloa grass. And again, it's a third zone of the garden that feels completely different.
The planting here is lush. This hydrangea has lots of space to flourish. There's texture in different leaf shapes, the gentle sound of water, and an amazing atmosphere.
It's so beautifully tranquil.
This garden is about the size of a tennis court, and yet, by hiding the fences and boundaries with plants, it feels much bigger and borrows the landscape and the trees beyond. But it still creates the private universe that the owners really wanted.
I'm really glad that Debbie and Ian took the time out to design a garden for themselves so that they can experience what it's like to be in this wonderful, tranquil space.
I like the idea of a 10-minute lawn. There's no question about it that every garden, however small, needs somewhere that is a breathing space, where there's not too much going on, it's not too busy, and the eyes can just let go. Right, I have got here our winter salads, grown for fresh salad every single day between the end of October and into April. Now, the only way I can really guarantee that is in a greenhouse. But you can do it on any scale. You can do it on a very small greenhouse, you can do it in a container, but it does mean a bit of forward planning. So these were sown in August, pricked out into plugs, and now we're ready to plant out. We've got winter spinach, we've got a red mustard, rocket, and corn salad, or lamb's lettuce. And the protection of the greenhouse keeps them going over winter. Now I'm going to start with rocket. Let's put that like that. Use a board, and I plant these out in rows. And rocket is one of those plants that if you give it a chance will grow quite big with a mass of leaves, and we'll cut it 3, 4, even 5 times during the course of the winter months. This rocket is not the same rocket that you get in supermarkets or restaurants, which is a perennial rocket. This is very much an annual and very quickly goes to seed if it gets too warm. I've added lots of compost, and it's worth pointing out that if you're going to grow anything over the winter months, you want maximum light. And after a summer of using a greenhouse, the important thing to do is clean the glass. And that means the light levels can be as good as possible, and you'll be surprised how influential that is. It's really important. As I say, we want big plants, so I'm spacing them out quite widely. And of course, you get a different range of flavours in winter. Rocket and mustard are mustardy. The spinach is a winter variety, a little bit coarser than a spring spinach. And corn salad has a lovely, buttery, light taste. It is important to keep these watered because, of course, they're inside and therefore not going to get any rain at all. And in about 3-4 weeks' time, as our harvest outside in the vegetable garden becomes thinner, we will have access to fresh salad leaves right through the darkest days of winter. And I have to say that's one of the great treats of my life. I love it. We're off now to Dorset, which is always good news because it's such a beautiful county, and to Poole, where Paul James Allen lives and where he has created a garden to attract as much as possible of one of his great passions, which are butterflies.
When I was younger, I started to develop a bit of an obsession with butterflies, and the reason for that was I was taken to a butterfly house in Dorset years ago, and they gave me some caterpillars to take away and rear up, which I thought were fabulous, because I was into the creepy-crawly side more than the flattery side, funnily enough. But when they actually hatched out the chrysalis, I was amazed, and then from that period onwards, I was just hooked. So the aim of this garden was to actually make it very butterfly-friendly, and also grow lots of unusual plants as well that I hadn't had the chance to grow before because I had some more space. So to date we've had 17 different butterfly species. For a smallish garden isn't a bad feat, to be honest. When you're planting for butterflies, you're looking at a simple sort of flower shape. Buddleias, obviously, the smaller, dense panicles of flowers are really good, and things like Verbena bonariensis also very good. A lot of people are familiar with buddleias, and to be fair, they get quite a bad rap. People like see them at the side of railway tracks and think, I don't want that in my garden. You have to remember this is a huge and diverse group of plants, and many of the varieties are very suitable for butterflies, so you don't have to grow the monsters in your garden to get the butterflies in. And this is a very good one. This is called Salmon Spheres, which is a lovely cross buddleia, crossed with Buddleia crispa and Buddleia globosa, and gives you a really lovely peachy and orangey colour flower here. Very unusual colour spectrum on that one. And this is actually perpetual flowering because it's sterile. It will keep flowering. So long as there's warmth, it'll keep going. And this can flower even in the dead of winter if you've got warm days. So a great one to put into your garden. A popular misconception is that if you've got a garden that isn't sunny, you can't attract the butterflies in, but you really can. Half of our garden here is either in full shade or dappled shade, and we get a lot of butterflies into those areas. This is a rather lovely plant. This is sweet rocket. A couple of different colours that it comes in. This is quite well known. It's got amazing, quite heavy evening fragrance, so a lovely one to grow in your garden anyway. But this one actually provides nectar for the adult butterflies in the spring, April, May and June, sometimes into July. And then the leaves will provide a caterpillar food plant source for the small and green vein whites. And the seed pods, let those grow as well. You'll have some seed around, but also some of these will be eaten by the orange-tipped caterpillar. So you've got 3 butterflies going on there in one plant. Another thing to remember if you're planting for butterflies, if you can, please try and accommodate some of their larval food plants. It's getting far more difficult for butterflies to actually breed in the wild these days because of habitat loss. And if you live in an inner city, it's really important you actually bring in some of these caterpillar food plants in. There's a few key ones you can really go for here and attract butterflies almost immediately. One of them is buckthorn, easy and cheap to buy. Not particularly interesting, but if you mix it up into a mixed hedge, if you've got a hedge already, it will provide you a nice splash of green. But what the most important thing is it attracts a brimstone butterfly in, which is the bright yellow butterfly you see in the spring. They can actually sense that buckthorn plant from about 5 miles away. So if you've got that in your garden, they will move into your garden and actually start a colony. A lot of butterflies are getting a bad rap because people think they eat your plants and eat your crops. There's only 2 species of butterflies which do that, and they are the cabbage whites, well known, large white and the small white. But you have to remember that they're also becoming quite scarce too, worryingly. So what we want to do is still encourage them in, but plant something different. So here we've gone for nasturtium. I've gone for an unusual variety, which is called Phoenix, which has got these lovely flame-type flowers. And you've got to remember with nasturtiums, they have a huge burst of growth, so they easily sustain a colony of caterpillars and keeps them off your cabbages. And as you can see here, they've already started having a go. And actually, I've just spotted there's a little colony of large white caterpillars on there right now. So the interesting thing here in the back garden, where it's really shady, we've got an oak tree which is covered in ivy, actually. And I know it's the bane of most people's lives, but this is serving a really important purpose. We've got several different species of butterfly in the UK which hibernate and use the ivy as shelter for the winter. So they'll tuck themselves away in the leaves and they'll be protected through the worst of the weather. And ivy is actually double whammy because it does provide a larval food plant for the holly blue. So maybe give ivy a chance in your garden. I spent most of my life concentrating on the butterfly side, but beyond that, I'm also a little bit of a plant nut. So I actually planted a lot of these plants here specifically for me. So there's one plant that I've got a bit obsessive over. I have to admit, it's like, you know, quite unhealthy, but it's the abutilon. Most writings on abutilons will tell you to grow them in full sun. Something I thought for many, many years, but trust me, if you've got a shady garden, I absolutely love it. And I find the ones in the shade here doing way better than the ones in the sunshine. So I grow 50 different sorts of abutilon in this garden. This one is an unusual variety called Klein Schonheit. Beautiful, vibrant, orangey red there. People usually associate abutilons with the yellow and a red bell-shaped flower. They come in so many different forms and so many different colours, a real rainbow of colours there. With abutilons, what I recommend you do is feed them with a really high nitrogen feed the first year you plant them. That'll give you the bulk to growth, to give you that height you want. And then the following year, feed with a high potash, and that will give you your high yield of flowers. I think my love for butterflies is basically a broad love for nature, and the fact that we all need to do our bit in our gardens to have as much of a natural environment as we possibly can, as we're losing so much wildlife across the world, actually. So the more we can do in a home garden, the better, really, and it brings us joy to see that our hard work is paying off and bringing these wonderful creatures in.
Paul is so right about the importance of our gardens for encouraging and conserving nature. There is a statistic that our gardens now, the total area of UK gardens, are greater than the total area of British nature reserves. So gardens are our biggest resource for encouraging and conserving nature in all its forms. Now, these pumpkins are ready for harvesting, and at this time of year it's a trade-off between encouraging them to grow and to ripen while still growing attached to the vine, or to cut your losses, harvest them and then bring them in and ripen them indoors, because all squashes, but particularly pumpkins, love heat. However, now we're into October, the heat is diminishing fast, so it's time now to harvest them and then take them somewhere where they can ripen a little bit more. And when you do harvest them, you don't want to damage the stem at all. And to avoid that, don't cut the stem, but cut either side of the attachment. So what you end up with is a T shape like that. And that will protect the stem, because if you damage the stem, then they won't store nearly so well. So I'm going to take that one, and I've got another one here. And don't hold them by the stem either. And these, by the way, are Turk's turban. Really decorative, but they make great eating too. So we'll put that in there like that. And you notice I'm not just chucking them in, gently put them in, because you don't want to damage them. Now, having said that, this one here, it's been nibbled, which is not going to help its preservation. However, we'll keep it for the moment. Right, that goes in there. Now, these two rows are a squash called Crown Prince. Crown Prince is a really good eater. If you like to eat squash or pumpkin, then this is the one that I would recommend most highly. So we'll just cut this like that, and like that. And there we are. You see, it's got this beautiful glaucous colour, not quite grey and not quite blue. And the flesh inside is as orange as these other squashes there. So again, handle it carefully. I'm going to pick the rest, but while I'm doing that, here are your jobs for the weekend. Any salad crops or seedlings that you have growing outside can have their lives lengthened by cloching. If you've got cloches, give them a good wash, as they may have got dirty over summer, then place them over the plants, leaving the ends open so they're still well ventilated. And this will protect them from any cold nights. Now is a good time to take stock of your houseplants, whatever they may be. Check them over for any damaged, diseased or dead leaves and remove them. If any are very dry, give them a soak, either in a sink or a bucket of water, and then drain them thoroughly. Mist them as needed and be prepared to keep misting them. And finally, move any succulents or cacti to the brightest windowsill that you have. It's a good idea to tackle the perennial weeds in your borders now, whilst you can still see where they are. Dig out as much root as you possibly can. I'm removing comfrey, which can go onto the compost heap. But don't add invasive weeds like creeping buttercup, bindweed or couch grass, and instead put them in a garden waste bin. Now, I've got these two here. They are not going to really ripen. This is a classic case where I should have cut these off when they were smaller, because all they've done is I've got two pumpkins that are not really going to be edible, and they've taken energy away from these. So do as I say, not as I do, and worth checking pumpkins and taking off any that are not of a reasonable size round about the end of August. I'll put them out anyway. And of course, the Turk's turban. And these are ready to eat now. So what we're doing is by putting them in a greenhouse and letting them get as much sun as possible. And that will ripen the skins. And the harder the skin, the better they store. And these are pretty hard. They're not bad at all. But this one is Mousse de Provence, which is the biggest. The skin is the softest. I can almost push that in with my finger. So this really needs to ripen. So we'll put that there like that. And of course that will make a fantastic Halloween pumpkin. I think slugs will have eaten that, which is a very good reason not to let pumpkins sit on the ground. And that means that's not going to keep so well, so that's the first one that we'll eat. But that won't be for a few weeks yet. And that's it for today. I will be back here at Longmeadow next Friday at 8 o'clock. So until then, bye-bye.